Hello, hello, hello. It's Chris Howard from Lace Partners joining you once again for our latest HR on the Offensive live stream. And today I have a friend of our podcast who's been on before. It's Gethin Nadin from Benifex. How you doing, mate? You all right?
I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
I am good. So, Gethin, we're going to take 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, but about 5 minutes to have a little chat because you and I had a bit of a conversation over LinkedIn and then through InMails on an interesting article that I saw, which I kind of want a bit of spiciness, as we were just talking about in the virtual green room beforehand. So it was written by The Economist. It's called "When Will Remote Workers See Their Pay Cut?" It came out at the beginning of February, on February the 6th, or a few weeks after reducing, after it was produced. But the premise of it is this idea that organizations should be considering, with the whole remote working discussion, an answer to people that are wanting to bring people back into the office, this idea that, well, why don't you just lower pay for remote workers? Because after all, they aren't paying money to travel into the office. You've got people that are traveling into the office, and so therefore they're almost more visible. There's arguments around the whole collaboration thing. This article talks about how, often when you get a perk, there's an assigned and perceived monetary value to it. And so therefore, this is seen as a perk. And so therefore, why shouldn't there be a monetary value to it? And what I will say, just before I let you jump in and hit me with some thoughts around some of the challenges I think we can make around this article, is it does say that, it does acknowledge that some firms and some organizations do recognize the issues around, well, what happens if we have this in place and you have pay gaps that appear and challenges between the in-house, well, the workers from the office and the remote workers, but also the potential gender issues as well, because you might get more people more mothers that are then perhaps working from home or wanting to work from home as they raise children. So it does say that, but I think broadly speaking, the article was very much, hey, this is a potential solution. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what challenges this presents if you have this kind of mindset.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous, I think, to say that remote work is a perk. It's a way of working. It's a way of working that we have now years of evidence and millions of employees' data to prove that it's an effective for employers and actually makes a pretty significant difference to the lives of employees. So saying it's like a perk, I think, is like saying paying a fair wage is a perk. I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing to say. And I think this article and many like it are designed for us to have these conversations, right? They are clickbaity. They're specifically polarizing to get us to click and share and comment. Good news doesn't sell. We know that. We know the media across the world loves to polarize people, to create two groups of people and pitch them against each other. And I think we've seen this a lot with the home and remote working debate, where you kind of create two groups of people. And like most things, there's not two options. Most people kind of sit in the middle, where most people want a little bit of office work, see the benefit in that, but also want some remote work. But I think where we're getting to is that it might be a reason to accept or decline a role, but I don't think it's a perk. So it might be a way of attracting somebody to come and work with you or not to work for you. But what we've got to remember is that we're talking about this a lot now in the last couple of months, loads of articles. We have to think about this as a natural evolution of how some people are working. It's a way of working for many that has been around for far longer than the pandemic. I mean, there were times when people were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day in dark, dirty, dingy, repetitive work. Society changed and 7 days became 6, 12 hours became 8, 6 days became 5. The workplace is a constant state of change when we think about how and where people work. And this is just another evolution of that. Now, I don't actually advocate that everyone should be working at home or in the office. I don't think it's that binary. But whatever your view on kind of where an employee should work, there is significant evidence to back up that enable an employee to work in a way or a location that they think is best for them, whether that's time or place, that leads to higher productivity and more positive outputs. So forcing people home or even forcing them all to the office is not the way to go. It should be about allowing people to work in a way that gets the best results for them and their employer. And I think the problem with lowering pay for those working from home is that you're forcing somebody to choose an option that will, likely either way, leads to lowering productivity. So if you think about it, an employee who chooses to work from home and that's where they get their best work done, they'll no doubt struggle to deal with a drop in pay. And that will lead to things like kind of resentment and eventually disengagement at work, or pretty quickly disengagement at work as a result of that low productivity. And I suspect pretty high turnover. But conversely, for those who can't afford to reduce pay, which is pretty much everyone, what you're essentially doing is forcing somebody into a situation that's going to drive their productivity down, and kind of for what? And I think what's interesting is we even have examples coming out of the US at the moment where businesses are saying, we want you all to come back to the office. And then one real example, for all of you that do come back in the office, we're giving you a $10,000 raise. And so again, that becomes really difficult for an employee to argue with. If an employee works really effectively at home and they don't feel they work great in the office, they're just going to come to the office because you're offering them 10 grand more. But ultimately, you're not going to get that productivity. You might get some of the other benefits, but overall, I think you're just going to force people into a situation because you're putting money in front of this. And I think, yeah, I do think it's ridiculous. But I think what's clear in this whole debate and articles like this are showing us that it is becoming a way of attracting or retaining talent. And despite the rise in the return to office mandates, hybrid and remote working remains pretty good for business. There's a guy called Nick Bloom, who's a Stanford professor, who 100% somebody worth following on LinkedIn if you're interested in this debate. He showed recently that a paper examining 10,000 startups after 2020 found that hybrid startups grew at a faster rate than the others. And he believes it's because of the better hires who want hybrid working and therefore have less turnover, as well as all the stuff we know about hybrid working and increased productivity. And 91% of global employees say they have a positive view of working from home. And even in the UK, the latest ONS data says that the primary reasons why people want more hybrid or remote working is overwhelmingly to do with improvements in work-life balance. And if you compare that with what employees say kind of in my world, where what they want most from their benefits and rewards and perks at work, it's almost always better work-life balance. And so it's a really kind of interesting debate, but I generally think it's not a perk, it's a way of working. And the evidence is really is heavily mounted in the favor of the employer in that situation rather than the employee.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And I quite like the way in which you're framing it. It's almost like organizing, what you said a minute ago, it's almost as if organizations, business models change and the way in which people work changes, evolves, adapts. And so therefore having this kind of, what we did 5 years ago, I mean, we can use the pandemic as that line in the sand if you want to, but ultimately it's the world of work changes and businesses that are going to be successful need to adapt and evolve and change with that. And any kind of just final thoughts on, I want to get your take on on that kind of idea of just the evolution of businesses. And do you think that organizations that have this kind of mindset, I mean, I think this is kind of a leading the witness and a bit of a rhetorical question really, but just thoughts around organizations that potentially are going to face being left behind? Because we talked about remote working being table stakes, like post-pandemic. That's what you're going to need to offer this in order to keep the best talent. But so I guess the question there is more around your thoughts around the evolution of work and how organizations need to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole big conversation we can go into around the majority of people, but especially younger people under the age of 40, rejecting wholesale the idea of capitalism, right? They saw their parents' jobs for life disappear. We don't get the kind of pensions my parents got. The house price versus wage growth is just wildly different to what it used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. So this whole deal isn't working for so many young people. And so they're looking for a way of living their life and not committing loads to work. And that doesn't mean they're not great employees who are going to work really hard and come up with great ideas. They've just realized that they saw their parents give everything to a company that screwed them over, and they don't want that. And so it's a hot topic for employees, this balance between how much do I give to a company that can just get rid of me tomorrow versus how do I live the life I want to live or spend time with family and friends. And a third of US workers said this year that they're willing to go on strike to remain to be able to work from home. And I think lost in the mire of all these articles and these clickbait titles is what employees want. And I think it's where a lot of the challenge is. Employers who are forcing people to return to office, they're far more interested in what the employers want, which is control over people, than what the people actually want. And I think they're struggling with the fact that because of that, world of work is changing and that employer-employee relationship has changed because of that. And a lot of the evidence we've got and a lot of the commentary from other experts is that these return to office mandates are perhaps a way of forcing downsizing, forcing people to quit so they don't have to fire them or make them redundant. But I think you're right. I think we are seeing this as table stakes. It's becoming far less about remote or in-office working and far more about exactly what kind of employer do you want to work for. Do you want to work for an organization that values you, your home life, your family, your well-being? Or do you want to work for an employer that's solely interested in what they want to achieve and see you as a cog in a machine? I mean, 60% of Brits say they would quit their job tomorrow if flexibility was stopped. Recruiters reveal in their data that around 70% of them have seen an increase in candidates coming from companies that had mandated office requirements. 75% of UK recruiters said that candidates turn down jobs as soon as they find out they don't offer hybrid working. And even so far in 2025, Randstad, the world's largest recruitment agency, say across Europe, Asia Pacific, and all of America, work-life balance has now surpassed pay as the number one thing employees are looking for. And so we've got these kind of huge volumes of data coming through that what the employee wants is this kind of stuff. They want work-life balance, and hybrid working is part of the flexibility that they want to see. And what employers fail to realize sometimes is that your best people produce most of your output. So we know that high performers produce most output in most businesses and most industries. And they're the people with the most options. They're the people who go and get a job elsewhere and are likely to be snapped up by a competitor. So I think it's a smart move for anyone who's looking at return to office mandates and actively trying to attract people from those organizations, which we've seen a lot of. Some businesses have kind of advertised on LinkedIn, hey, we do hybrid working. So if you work for X company, maybe now's the time to come and chat to us. But one last point I think I would make is, let's be honest here, these articles and so many like them are being designed to rile us up and get us to support working from home or support hybrid working and to shout and scream and click and share. And last year, some new home working research was shared widely by the UK media in particular. And it was one particular study that found that working from home reduced quit rates by about 35%, and that hybrid or working from home had no material impact on productivity over a short period and long period of time. But how that study was reported in the UK media was quite fascinating. So the Daily Express went for the headline, "New study blasts working from home employees as it makes one key finding." The Guardian's headline for the same study was, "Hybrid working makes employees happier, healthier, and more productive." Now, if you look at the study, both of those headlines are actually wrong. One said that it made people more productive, which it wasn't what the study found. And one blasted working from home when actually everything that it did find was largely positive in the favor of things like productivity, etc. And what they're clearly doing is actually pandering to the audience of pro-office or pro-working from home. So that polarizing that's coming out again. And I also think there's a bit of a moral panic about working from home and return to office mandates. And it seems like each time someone forces to return to office or a CEO says hybrid working doesn't work, it gets headline news. But the reality is, and there was a great piece in the FT recently about this, that working from home levels have actually remained relatively stable since the start of 2023, or even through all this stuff. So even when you look at people like Amazon's return to office mandate, when people monitored people going to Amazon locations and Amazon offices, they found barely any difference. And that was after those directions to work from home. And again, Nick Bloom, the Stanford professor, shares some great stuff online. And he's looked at, I think they studied 1,200 plus US return to office kind of policies or declarations. And they presented those at a Stanford conference last year. And the summary of all of those included some fascinating results. But what they basically found was return to office mandates were far more likely in companies that were run by older male CEOs, were far more likely for companies who operated in large cities with cheap office space, and that the return to office mandates led to an exit of employees, particularly amongst the most tenured employees, and led to reductions in employee sentiment, which was like Glassdoor reviews. And so typically what they found in their research was return to office mandates were generally driven by one CEO and their personal views, and that CEO's age and gender mattered a lot to the decision they made. That policies to reverse or bury bad news, these policies came out because results were typically bad. So businesses put these things out to get all the column inches to distract from some bad news they wanted to publish. And that headcount reduction, as I mentioned, or that kind of delayering, as they say, where the employees were quitting and it was just a way of getting people to quit. So I think we've got to be smart when we look at these headlines. We have to get better at understanding what the real story is, why somebody's really trying to tell us this thing, and what investments the certain people might be having funding this kind of research or pushing this message.
I think that's a really, really good point to end on. As Gethin just mentioned, be mindful of what you're reading, I guess, is the general approach, and also that the nuances around remote working and the data, as Gethin has just showed, is there of the value of it. So if you're, as an organisation, looking at the way in which you approach your return to work mandates, perhaps just check out some of that information that Gethin mentioned itself. Gethin, thank you very much for joining me on this quick live stream today. Been really, really good to chew the fat on this one.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.
Yep, and we will catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive Live. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.